This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. You ever wonder who actually recorded the phone call that Donald Trump made to Brad Raffensperger and Gene Sperling in Georgia, trying to find the 11,780 votes to try to take the election away from Joe Biden? You ever wonder who recorded it? We always took it as an article of faith. It must have been Sperling or Raffensperger. It wasn't. It was Jordan Fuchs, according to the Daily Beast. Jordan Fuchs. Who's that, you might say? Well, let me just tell you, she's tough as nails. She's an ally, a Republican operative, yes, for Brad Raffensperger, and a friend of Gene Sperling's, and very protective of them. She'd take a bullet for them, and she decided to hit the record button when she helped arrange that particular phone call in January of 2022, because she had gotten a sinking suspicion, a sneaking suspicion, and a sinking feeling. I combined them into a sneaking suspicion that that there was things afoot that were improper in the way that Donald Trump was trying to extort elected officials and election officials to try to steal the election from Joe Biden. What happened, before we get to her hitting record and how we learned about that through the Daily Beast reporting, is that as early as November, Donald Trump and his surrogates, his minions, were making their way to Georgia to try to extort and pressure elected officials and election officials. There's no other way to put it. The reporting is that Don Jr. and his girlfriend, Kimberly Guilfoyle, went and pressured the heads of the Republican Party down in Georgia, Dave Schaefer in particular, who's now an indicted co-conspirator as a fake elector, to try to get him to declare that the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, also a Republican, Gene Sperling the same, were incompetent, should be replaced, and that there was fraud in the election. They pressured successfully now ex-senators Kelly Loeffler and Dave Perdue, who have been replaced by Democrats, to also declare that Brad Raffensperger and Gene Sperling should be replaced, because they had the temerity to announce in November during the counting that everything was going fine, Biden was in the lead, and there was no irregularities. Well, of course, they didn't like that. And so then we had Jordan Fuchs learning, as deputy chief of staff of Raffensperger, that Mark Meadows was trying to get into the counting room in Georgia. This is why Mark Meadows has been indicted, and tried to meet with the lead investigator for Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who was there making sure that the count was going properly. And there's a recorded phone call actually there too that's in the hands of the prosecutors, where Donald Trump called the investigator to encourage her to do the right thing, which of course in his mind is to throw the election towards him and declare that there was fraud in the election. He brought up Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss during this Trump to the investigator phone call. And this is even before the phone call to Brad Raffensperger and Gene Sperling. And Fuchs didn't like any of this. She didn't like the phone call to her investigator. She made it clear that the chief of staff for the president of the United States had no ability. He was persona non grata in the counting room. He wasn't going to be allowed in. There's a reason he was barred from the room in Coffee County and in other places. It's because Jordan Fuchs made the decision to bar him. He didn't like the fact that the Mark Meadows decided to do a photo op with the investigator as he was trying to sweet talk her to get into that counting room in Coffee County, and took a picture. He made it clear to everybody that, while if you're at the White House and you want a photo op with Mark Meadows, that's fine. But he's not supposed to be doing photo ops while there's a count going on and the certification of the election is hanging in the balance. She, even though she's 31 years old, seems to have a lot of morals and judgment here and a lot of civic duties. She may not be with the party that I'm a part of, but so far I'm liking what I'm hearing about Jordan Fuchs. Jordan Fuchs then, with all of that as the backdrop, Don Jr., along with Guilfoyle, extorting and strong-arming election officials, elected officials, GOP officials, the phone call that Donald Trump made to the investigator to try to encourage her, so to speak, to do the right thing and find votes for him. Right? The photo op, Mark Meadows trying to push his way like a bull in a china shop in a counting room to try to get in there, to try to suggest that there was fraud when there was none. This is what leading up to, right, the phone call in January. And when Mark Meadows arranged that phone call after trying frequently to get a hold of Brad Raffensperger and being rebuffed, right, being given the Heisman by by Jordan Fuchs. There finally was a phone call arranged. Jordan Fuchs, apparently, based on the reporting, because this is COVID time, was visiting her grandmother in Orlando, Florida. Hold that thought about Florida. But had the presence of mind and the cojones and the brass ones to hit record for that phone call. And that's where the phone call came from. Jordan Fuchs, I'm giving you the award today in my hot take for the Patriot, a Patriot Award, regardless of your party. You did your civic duty, even against possible other criminal exposure for her. Because if she recorded it from Florida, and this is the point of the Daily Beast, but I'll bring it together as a lawyer. Florida, if you're recording a conversation, you got to have consent of both parties, both sides of the phone. It's a two-party consent state. Georgia, I think, is a one-party consent state. So she technically violated a criminal statute. Doesn't mean it's going to get barred from being used. But I assure you now that this story is floating around, we're going to see a motion to suppress the evidence, suppress the audio. And I think there's actually already been one filed by Steve Sadow for Donald Trump a long time ago. Suppress the phone call. And they're going to argue that it was improperly recorded by Jordan Fuchs in Florida when she had to get the consent of Donald Trump and Mark Meadows, which she did not. But thank God it exists, because as I said at the top of the hot take, it is the single most powerful piece of evidence that we have. Sure, there's places where Donald Trump got memos, and there's people that are going to testify about presentations that they made with him or to him in the Oval Office, in the West Wing, and in different places. Rusty Bowers in Arizona, former Speaker of the House in Arizona, is going to testify about conversations that he had with Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. He just didn't record them. This is Donald Trump on the phone, recorded, right? It's not one of those TV shows where where it's like a a joke phone call. You're on candid recording. This is real. This is an AI. This isn't even I for Donald Trump. This is just his getting frustrated that people around him weren't doing what he wanted to do. He used to have a lot of buffers, like Godfather 2, a lot of buffers around him. They didn't have to make these kind of phone calls, but here he did. He phoned that investigator in Georgia, and she has a copy of it. She recorded it. And has turned it over to the prosecutors. Brad Raffensperger, by way of Jordan Fuchs, his intrepid deputy chief of staff, she should get a promotion, by the way, for this, turned it over to the prosecutors. And now Donald Trump has to answer for it. It's a mystery. We talked about the 11,780 vote perfect phone call a lot on Legal AF, that podcast at the intersection of law and politics on the MeidasTouch network from the beginning. But we never knew who actually hit record. Jan 6 report doesn't say who hit record. The indictment, the 29th count of the indictment in Georgia about it doesn't say it. And the DC election interference case doesn't say it, even though it's mentioned. So we were always like, I just took it, like I said, as an article of faith that it was Brad Raffensperger. Who knew that there was such a thing called a Jordan Fuchs who would have the brass ones to protect, and her loyalty to protect Gene Sperling and Brad Raffensperger in case that call went south, which it did, and that she would record it for posterity's purposes. More importantly, just stamp Exhibit A on it and use it in the prosecution. And I'm sure it was played for grand juries as well in order to obtain the indictments. So we'll keep an eye, now that this has sort of come to light more with the Daily Beast reporting and the identity of Jordan Fuchs, who I'm sure is going to get attacked now mercilessly and doxxed by MAGA. And I hope she doesn't, and swatted on top of it. We'll watch what happens with any motion to suppress the evidence that would be filed with Scott McAfee in Georgia or Judge Chutkan in the Federal District of Columbia case, and how they read it and how they resolve it. My prediction here is that the motion to quash or to suppress the evidence will be denied. It's not something that law enforcement did. It's something that, yes, may have been the product of a technical crime of not getting consent. But I think that the overwhelming need for justice and for the evidence to come in is going to lead to its being admitted. And we'll continue to follow it on Legal AF on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. So until my next hot take, and you can leave a thumbs up here if you want, leave a comment. It keeps us on the air, keeps the ratings alive. And until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.